Okay, this is not the lighting setup that I need. Okay, this could be an improvement. This side angle, windows open. I like this. Hello and welcome. My name is Gabriel, and today I'm going to be talking about books 6 through 8 of War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. This is the third of the discussion videos for the read-along that I am running with Kelsey over at I Read Today. If you've been following our schedule, this would have been your reading for week 3, but we are already well into week 4, quickly approaching week 5, and the hosts aren't even following our own schedule, so this has quickly just become read War and Peace at your own pace, as fast as you can. The videos will come out when we are able to make them. Do you like this outfit? I put on the hat because my hair is just terrible, and then I put on the jacket because I thought I looked silly with just a hat. Anyways, the discussion. I'm gonna come clean about something. Part of the reason that it took me so long to read this section of the book was because anytime that I had free time and wasn't working on school or at work, I had a choice to make, and that choice was read War and Peace or watch Gilmore Girls. And I finally finished season 7. So these are really casual discussions. I just write down notes, which are just my thoughts on things that are happening as they happen. First up, in book 6, I think it's really funny that having come back from the war, Andre feels like his life is over, even though he's like 30. And he just has these big rants about how he is never gonna do anything new. It's all over. Everything's finished. Now that his wife is dead, book 6 is where we really start setting up the relationship between Anatole, that's later, between Andre and Natasha. And their interactions are charming, but Natasha, especially in book 6, is still characterized as like this tiny child, which makes it pretty uncomfortable to a modern reader. I also think there's a funny moment right before Andre meets Natasha where he's driving up to the Rostov house and he hears Sonia and Natasha laughing, but he's still in the midst of this like midlife crisis. And he's just like, wow, there are people laughing and enjoying themselves, and they have no knowledge of my life and my pain, and it's just like, get over yourself. Putting a pin in that, wow, these notes just go from one topic to the other. Sorry, I didn't like bridge them very... But I took a note here about how weird it is every single time that these characters talk about their serfs. Because in the middle of a regular casual conversation, they will just drop like, oh yeah, I went to visit my serfs this weekend, and you are forced to reckon with the fact that these people own people, like thousands of people. And that's really an interesting aspect of this book. And when you think about like what this book's purpose is, because Tolstoy wrote this to talk about how like everyday life and even history isn't shaped by like great men, it's shaped by everyday people. And so he wrote about everyday people in really intimate terms as a way of showing like how political events are influenced by like the lives of actual people living their lives. But the serfs are treated as these like inhuman like masses just off screen. And so it's interesting to think about how if this book is supposed to be a intimate look at humanity, you have to consider who Tolstoy considers to be human. But of course, he's a much smarter writer than that. This is all based in its historical context, so really it's just making you think about who these people think are human. The next note that I wrote just says, Tolstoy thinks women are stupid. And that's a fun but terrible aspect of this book. So of course, there are tons of really fascinating, unique female characters in War and Peace who have their own complex lives and who have their own unique flaws. But I have noticed all of the flaws of these female characters kind of stem from this fundamental silliness and frivolity that Tolstoy just projects onto all women. Helene is a really great example of this because she's a really interesting woman with her own convictions about how she wants to live her life. And everybody around her sees her as this fascinating and really smart woman. But because we are viewing her through Pierre's lens, she is just this idiot who has fooled everyone into thinking that she is so incredible when really she has no idea what she's doing. And with Helene, it's really obvious that this is happening because we're seeing it through Pierre's lens. And so, as a reader, you should cut Tolstoy some slack and say, no, that's not what Tolstoy thinks about women, it's just what Pierre thinks about women, specifically what Pierre thinks about Helene. But then you see it pop up a lot with Sonia and Natasha, who are their own bag of worms. And then there's Princess Mary, who I think has the most complexity as a character because she is constantly sacrificing herself in order to make other people more comfortable. And she relies on her faith and her family for comfort. But Tolstoy still kind of writes these flaws as if she is missing some important information, and as if she were just capable of wrapping her head around some greater concept, she would be happy. And I think that these same flaws apply to the male characters, but because so much of the story is viewed through the lens of the male characters, we are often given their explanations and justifications for their actions, and they are given a lot more credibility than the female characters. When in reality, we're just not hearing the entire lengthy justification for why these women are doing the things that they do. Like, Pierre is a person who makes a lot of really frustrating decisions and has a lot of really weird thought spirals that he goes down, which I think reveal a kind of fundamental silliness within him. But those words of like silly and frivolous are only ever applied to the women. And so I think that that is a interesting layer to unpack in this book. Then I started talking about Natasha, and I think that she's a really interesting character because she does not love anyone, but she really desperately wants to be in love. Like in book 6, when Boris is courting her and she goes to her mom and she's like, I don't love him, but he's really nice to me. Should I marry him? And her mom is like, no, you don't love him. And she's like, but I want to because he's really nice. Then there is the ball where Natasha and Andre dance together. This is a very iconic scene in the book. I don't really have much to say about it. I just wrote it down. I wrote down that they have really great chemistry and that it's a fun scene, even though she's 17 and he's 32. I don't have my microphone plugged in. Would you guys hate me if I plugged it in and the audio is just dramatically different for the second half of the video? Okay, I didn't do any tests for what this is gonna sound like, but there is a microphone plugged in now. Natasha's feelings towards Andre are also really funny to read about because she first describes them as really like agitating and anxiety inducing. And it's only after she has this moment where she like thinks to herself, is this love? And then she decides that it's love. And then she decides that she's in love with him. And then she decides that she's been in love with him ever since she first met him. On the opposite side, Andre's feelings towards Natasha are fascinating. He, of course, is really fascinated by her. He thinks that she is really charming. I don't know what the word is. Just like bewitching. And so, of course, he pursues her. But he is so terrified of commitment to anything new in his life that the second he finds out that she reciprocates his feelings, he falls out of love like that. Like, it's just over for him. Between Natasha falling in love with every man who is nice to her and Andre being too terrified of commitment to ever genuinely love another person, maybe this engagement isn't the best idea. Book 7 begins with an essay about human nature and idleness. It's really well contained here, and it only takes up half of the first chapter, but that is the start of something that we will see a lot more of in the later half of this book. So just get ready for it. A lot of it's really interesting, but it just drags on for a long time, so you need some stamina to get through the essays and get back to the plot. Book 7 also has the worst scene in the entire book. I am sorry, I hate the wolf hunting scene. I just cannot bring myself to care at all. This book is unfathomably long. There is just scene after scene of things, but I feel like every other scene in this book perfectly leads into the next scene and has an excellent reason for being there. The wolf hunting scene does not. There are no stakes. I don't like it. It isn't fun. There are no stakes. They just are just in this house and they're like, let's go wolf hunting. And then they go wolf hunting. And that's it. Imagine if there were actual stakes and consequences as a result of the scene. Like, what if just in the middle of the scene, Natasha died? Like, they just killed her. That would make it worth being in here, but otherwise I hate it. Then I took a note about how Sonia and Nikolai are the real romance in this book. I'm not super invested in their relationship, but I just think it's sweet that they have been constantly in love with each other from the beginning and are still constantly in love with each other. And it's just really satisfying to have them engaged now, even though that creates some tension between Sonia and Madame Rostov, the mom. Then there's just a lot of notes about like love and engagements, because book 7 is just where all of the engagements take place. I think the engagement of Boris and Julie is really funny because they cannot stand each other. They're just in the middle of a fight. They're in the middle of a fight. Boris is talking about how much he hates women, and Julie is like, really, you hate women? And then he stops himself and he's like, no, I don't hate women. I meant to tell you that I'm in love with you. And she's like, oh, you are? Well. And then they get engaged. And then they get married. Oh, there's also one of my favorite scenes in the book, which is this conversation between Pierre and Sonia. I said Sonia, but I meant Princess Mary. I meant Princess Mary Bolkonsky, not Sonia. Where Sonia finds out that Boris is in Moscow looking for a wife, and she has no real opinion of him, but she's like, oh, I'm single, I could marry him. Pierre just asks her, would you marry him? And in her head, she has this thought, I can trust Pierre. I can be vulnerable in front of Pierre. And she just blurts out, oh God, Pierre, there are moments I think I'd marry anyone. And it's just a really sweet, vulnerable moment from Mary, and Pierre is just really flustered. He has no idea how to even begin to respond to that. And that is where my notes stopped, because I listened to the entirety of book 8 today on a walk. I went for a 5-mile walk. It lasted hours, and I listened to book 8 from start to finish. And I really don't have too much to say about book 8, other than that this is the section that Natasha Pierre and the Great Comet of 1812, the musical by Dave Malloy, is based on. If you're familiar with the musical, then this is absolutely a treat for you to read, because Dave Malloy takes most of his lyrics as like direct quotes from the book, and so listening to the musical, it's just like the book set to music. Wow, yeah, I wish I'd taken notes just to comment on like the plot, but this is like embarrassing. I've like run out of things to say. I just want to talk about the musical. Something really interesting that they do in the musical that doesn't happen in this section in the book is they take the duel between Pierre and Dolokhov from a couple books ago, and they implant it right into the middle of this. That way Pierre's existential crisis about like where his life is going overlaps with Natasha's fall from grace. That way they're both in really vulnerable places in their lives when they intersect at the very end. Speaking of the ending, I think that it is one of the most beautiful parts not only of this book, but ever written. I think that that final chapter, that conversation between Pierre and Natasha, is perfect. I think that literature peaks right there. And I think that you should listen to the final 2 songs of the musical Natasha Pierre and the final 2 songs of the musical, which are called Pierre and Natasha and The Great Comet of 1812, because the lyrics are literally just that scene, word for word, set to music, and you have this like angel chorus and the orchestra swelling underneath it. It is the most beautiful music accompanying the most beautiful words, and it just feels like heaven opens up. It's fantastic. I'm sorry I don't have too much else to add to comment on in this section. I just think that it's really engaging, really fascinating. I can tell why Dave Malloy chose to adapt this section in particular, because it is one of the best parts of the book. But if you started reading this book because you're a fan of the musical, do not give up here, because a lot more of the best stuff ever written is still yet to come, and I won't spoil what that is. So from here on out, it is open territory. I also know that Kelsey loves this musical, so I'm going to invite her to share any of her thoughts on book 8, as well as her thoughts on the musical, in the next discussion video, which will be up whenever she feels like making it. We're really not following the schedule anymore. We are just reading this book as we can, keeping it as fun and casual as possible. Please comment down below your thoughts on any of these scenes in books 6 through 8. And if you want to keep reading along with us, then make sure that you are subscribed both to Kelsey at I Read Today and to me. If you liked this video, give it a big thumbs up, and I will see you guys next time.